Hey, welcome back to We Be Kids again. Every week you see me telling stories out in the woods or in the forest, but this week I've come to one of my favourite places here in the Lake District in Cumbria. Behind me is Wastwater, the deepest lake in the whole of England, and above me there is Scarce, the tallest mountain. And this is really an amazing landscape, and we love to come here as a family. It's one of our favourite places to come, and it always boosts our well-being when we come here. This is also a great place for one of my favourite stories, and the story that I'm going to share with you today is called The Story of the Six Sons. Now, this is a story of a mountain and a great lake. But this great lake was a very, very, very precious lake. You see, in the time of this story, the lake was the last bit of water that was left in the whole of the world. All the seas had dried up, all the oceans had dried up, all the rivers and streams and springs and lakes and lochs were completely bone dry, all except one big body of water. And this water sat at the bottom of a huge mountain. And the reason why all the other water on earth had gone is because up in the sky, unlike today when we have one sun, there were six suns. Can you imagine a world with six suns shining down bright, scorching the soil? Well, this wasn't a good time to be around if you were a human. You see, the suns were so hot that all the soil had turned to sand, so nothing would grow. There was no water to drink, and it was so hot that the people couldn't even come outside to do their daily nattering and chattering and meeting and gathering. So one day, a man came out of his dusty hut and he said, "We can't carry on like this. We have to do something to get the suns out of the sky." And everybody agreed, and he asked, "Can anybody give us an idea? What can we do?" And the crowd fell silent. But then a man stood up. He said, "I am the greatest ladder builder in the whole of the world. Bring me your sticks and your rope, and I will build a ladder so tall and so grand that it will go all the way to the suns. And one by one I will pull the suns down to earth and bury them in the sand." Now everybody began to chuckle to themselves. They said, "It can't be done. Nobody can build a ladder so long that it goes all the way to the suns. And even if you did, what would you rest it on? Because if you rest it on the sun, it will catch fire and burn and turn to ash and come tumbling to the ground." The ladder builder hadn't thought of that. So they asked again, "Does anybody have any ideas? How do we get the suns out of the sky?" And somebody else stood up. They said, "I am the greatest lasso maker in the whole of the world. Bring me all your rope and I will make a lasso so long that I will lasso the suns one by one, pull them down to earth, bury them in the sand." And again, people began to chuckle. They said, "You can't do that. Even if you did lasso them, as soon as the rope touched the suns, it would catch fire and burn and turn to ash and come tumbling to the ground." "I didn't think of that," said the lasso maker. So they asked again, "Has anybody got any ideas? How do we get the suns down from the sky?" And the whole crowd fell silent. And it was as if the meeting was coming to an end when a lady stood up. She said, "I am the greatest archer in the whole of the world. I make my own bows and my own arrows. My bows fire farther than any other bow, and my arrows never ever miss their target. Tomorrow I will climb to the top of the tallest mountain, and from there I will shoot the suns down from the sky one by one. The people began to chuckle. They said, you can't do that. Nobody can shoot arrows all the way to the sun, and if you did, as soon as they touched the sun, they would catch fire. They would burn and turn to ash, and come tumbling to the ground. But the lady was defiant. She said, I can, and I will. And with that, she stood up and she left. And she wandered off into the forest, and then she found herself a nice long piece of willow, and with that she made a new bow. And she went home and she slept. And the next day she woke filled with excitement. She walked to the bottom of the mountain and she began to trek higher and higher and higher. And as she went higher, people began to gather around the bottom to watch. It was a beautiful day. The sky was clear blue. The water on the lake was crystal clear and totally still, and each of the suns were reflecting down on the water. When the lady made it to the top, she took out her first arrow. She placed it in her bow and drew back. She pointed it high up into the sky. But just before she let go, she turned. She aimed the bow and the arrow to the water, to the reflection of the first sun, and she fired. The arrow shot through the air and it entered the water right through the centre of the first sun. Everybody watched. The reflection of the sun began to break. The crystal clear water began to turn blood red. Everybody looked up into the sky. There were only 5 suns. She pulled another arrow out. Again she aimed high, but at the last moment she turned and shot it into the water through the reflection of the second sun. Again the sun broke. More blood poured into the water. People looked up. There were only 4 suns. She did it again. 3. Again. 2. And again. So there was 1 sun left in the sky. She reached back and took her last arrow. She put it on the bow. She aimed high. But this time, just before she could let go of the arrow, the sun that was in the sky shot across and hid behind the horizon. It was so afraid of what had happened to the other suns that it wanted out of this world and it was gone. It turned from very, very hot and very, very bright to very, very dark and very, very cold. The lady came off the hill and they all began to cheer. Hooray! The suns are out of the sky, they called. And they began to party. And the party went on into the night. And on and on and on and on. You see, people were waiting for the next day to come, but the sun was so afraid that it remained hidden. And on that night, the world changed. From hot and dry to cold and dark. But still this wouldn't do. People couldn't go out. There were no electric lights. It was cold and still nothing would grow. So they called another meeting. They came out. They said, we have to bring the 1 sun back. What can be done? Somebody said, bring the lady. She should bring it back. She shot them away. But the lady couldn't help. In fact, none of the people could help. The sun was so afraid it wouldn't go near any people. So they said, let's ask the animals for help. And everyone agreed. They said, let's bring the fiercest of all animals. Let's bring the lion. The lion will let the sun know that it is safe to come back into the world. So they went looking for a lion, and it wasn't long until they returned with a giant beast. And the lion began to climb the mountain with its big paws. And it didn't take long until it was at the top. And when it got to the top, it shook its big mane, took in a deep breath, and it let out the most almighty roar. Now the sun heard this. It popped its head up and it looked around and it saw this great beast on the top of the mountain, and immediately it shot back down, filled with fear. Oh, that didn't work, they said. We need something less fierce. Somebody said, yeah, bring the elephant. So they went and they got an elephant, and the elephant came and it began to climb up the mountain, swaying its big trunk. And it took it longer than the lion to get to the top, but it made it. And when it got to the top, it flapped its big ears, it waved its trunk, and it let out the most almighty roar. And the sun heard this, and it popped its head up again, and it looked around, and again it saw another great beast and shot its head down, even more afraid than before. The people said, this just won't do. We need something less fierce, something more colourful and beautiful. They said, yeah, let's bring a peacock. So they went to look for a peacock, and they searched far and wide, but nobody could find a peacock. All they returned with was a cockerel, or a rooster, as it's also known. And they said, why have we brought a rooster? A rooster will not be able to bring the sun back. This is a terrible idea. But they all agreed to give the rooster a try. So they put the rooster down, and the rooster ran all the way up to the top, scurried along like roosters do. Now, one thing about this rooster, which is very different to all other roosters that you and I know. You see, we all know that a rooster has a red thing on its head, and this is called a comb. But during this time, the rooster didn't have that. It just had big feathers. So the rooster scurried up to the top. It wiggled its feathers. It shook its head. It took in a deep breath, and it let out the most almighty cock-a-doodle-doo! Cock-a-doodle-doo! Now the sun heard this. It popped its head up, and it looked around. And as it did that, a sunbeam shone down and it caught the top of the rooster's head. And all of its beautiful colours became apparent to the sun. And this got the sun's attention. And then the cockerel called out again, cock-a-doodle-doo! And the sun came up higher and higher and higher, until it was back in the sky. And that is why we only have one sun in the sky today and not 6. Now, normally at this point, people are thinking, is that a true story or is that a false story? Well, I can't make you decide if it's true or false. I'm just the storyteller. You have to decide if it's true or false. But let me tell you 2 very important clues that make me think that this is a true story. The first thing is that ever since that day, every rooster that was born a little bit differently to the one in the story. You see, every rooster that is born now is born with the comb on its head. And if you look carefully at that comb, you will see that it is blood red, as a reminder of this story and how the lady shot the suns and filled the crystal clear water with blood. And if you look really carefully at the comb on a rooster's head, you will notice that it doesn't have 1 point or 2 or 3 or 4, but 5 points. 1 in remembrance of each of the sons that were shot down. And if you're still not sure if this story is true, the biggest clue of all, the clue that happened yesterday, it happened today. It will happen again tomorrow and on, and it has happened every single day since this story. Is that every morning one creature waits and waits for its turn to let the sun know that it is safe to come back into the world. You see, every night the sun hides behind the horizon, and when it hears the call of the rooster, it knows that it is safe to return to the world. And that is the biggest clue of all. So I hope you enjoyed this story. It's my privilege to tell it you from this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. Thanks for stopping by at We Be Kids. If this is your first time, know that we have over 60 other stories, along with nature activities and arts and craft and yoga and mindfulness, all available over at webekids.net. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye.